Can folks online hear? Can folks online hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, but we can't see you.
Thank you. Give us 1 second, please. We actually have an internet outage and a system outage here at the schoolhouse, but we have a MiFi, so I'm getting folks logged in on the internet. And it's going to be just a little bit different here. So
Unbelievable.
Can members of okay.
You guys need to mute when that happens.
Can you hear me?
Yes. No.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Hey, all right. So we can use, you can turn off the speakers on your laptops and we can use our microphones here at the station. So members of the public can hear me right now, right?
Yes.
Brilliant. Okay, well, we're doing some workarounds here. As you probably heard Sharif say, we're having internet troubles. So we're making this work with the internet equivalent of chewing gum and string. I'd like to call the meeting to order if I could at 4:05. Apologies for the delay, but we're making this all work as best we can. I will go through the roll. I'm here, and Stephen Kasani.
Here.
Yeah. Here. Okay. Ken Levine.
Here.
Chris Rittler.
Here.
Michelle Takai.
Here.
William Urban.
Here.
Mark Waysar. Here. All right, brilliant. And Mark, you have to leave a little early, right? Potentially 5:30. Okay, so we've got that. All right, at this point, we'll move to item 2 on the agenda, oral communications for items not on the agenda. Anyone here in the room or online? I see a phone number with a hand. Please identify yourself. It's
That's me, Dana.
okay,
It's
great.
Dana Breen. And I just
Okay.
want to report, last night at ASCC, we didn't have power for 45 minutes. We had to totally patch the meeting together. And there were 20 architects, who were there waiting, not to mention the public. It seems like almost every meeting I go to is a half hour late because of our IT problem, and we've got to get it together. It's disrespectful to the public and to the other people who come to our meetings. So I hope you guys will get on this immediately. Thanks.
Thank you for that comment. I think we all are on the same page. Anyone else? I don't see any other hands, so we'll move on to announcements and presentations. That's item 3, and there aren't any. So we'll move directly. That's coming next. Item 4. It's Chris is taking minutes. Thank you. We'll next move to approval of the minutes from the last meeting. And that's attached to your packet here from the last time we were here in May. The wrong minutes are attached. Okay. That's a problem. Did I send you folks the May minutes? I thought I did do that, but they're just not attached here. Okay, so I must have made a mistake. Can we defer approval of these minutes to the next meeting, and I'll make sure that the proper draft is attached? Is that appropriate? Okay, if we're good to go on May, then we can approve the May minutes, and I'll see to it that the correct minutes get posted. Any move to approve? It's not mine.
Second.
Favor?
Yes.
Okay. Minutes are approved. There we go. Perfect. That's easy. I'm not listening to my echo anymore. For those online, that's quite distracting when you hear yourself half a second out of phase. Okay, minutes are approved. New business. We're going to move to review and discussion of the preliminary 2024-25 town budget. Sharif is going to open this with a presentation on the budget, and then we'll have a discussion.
Can folks hear me? Can folks hear me now?
Sharif is speaking online. If somebody hears him online, can you?
Yes.
Yeah, we hear.
Yes,
Okay, so you can hear me. I'm going to.
Yes.
yes.
Thank you, everybody. It does appear that we have an internet outage in Schoolhouse and Community Hall since last night, since the meeting they had last night. You will know, and I will make a note, we'll start with that first. One of the one of the CIP projects that's being proposed in our budget is an IT infrastructure upgrade. I have allocated $25,000. I'm requesting approval of that $25,000 for this very reason, because we were anticipating and we could see that the system was starting to fail and it was getting worse over time. And I think today, it broke. And so I apologize for that, but that is on our very first minds. We are using a MiFi here for all of the finance committee members to be on internet. But this is #1 priority. Obviously, we can't operate without having Wi-Fi in the schoolhouse and in the town. We replaced the parts today. Our assistant town manager was here for 4.5 hours, could not get it resolved with 2 different companies. And so we'll get to the bottom of it. But thank you, everybody, for your patience. What I'll do now is I'd like to share my screen. And talk about the preliminary budget for fiscal year 24-25. As you know, when we last met as a finance committee, we talked about bringing this back to committee to take a look at. And we didn't have a lot of time. We spent the last 2 weeks working on our preliminary budget. Myself, Tony, our new finance director, Cindy, and Corey, our assistant town manager, went through every budget line by line and had 6 or 7 different meetings in the last 2 weeks so that we could have this ready in time for finance committee to take a look at. And the purpose for today is to hopefully run through the preliminary budget, share with you what's included and what's not, and also get an understanding of what we want to do for the next 3 months so that we can prepare and present a final budget for fiscal year 24-25. The ink is literally still wet on some of these pieces. I probably just finished this 20 minutes ago. We met this morning on the budget. Some of the numbers are still moving, if you will, but I'm fairly confident in what we have here. And I'm also confident in the integrity of the budget itself based on what we have. And we'll show that to you. And we're actually going to open up the OpenGov system so finance committee can see what's in there. And so in preparation for tomorrow's meeting with council, what I wanted to do is share with finance committee and the public what our budget approach was, what's included and what's not included in the budget, what are some of our assumptions, talk about the fund balance, the reserves update, strategies for the path forward, and then questions and comments. So when we talk about budget approach, obviously the first thing we do is we want to make sure that those align with our council goals. If we recall 2-3 months ago, we met with council offsite. We came up with council goals that would be through fiscal year 24-25. So through next June. So we have basically a year from now to achieve those goals. And we tried to come up with realistic goals, and council tried to come up with realistic goals of what we wanted to accomplish. And those goals are here. I've highlighted those before. They're in the packet. It's also it'll be presented tomorrow, and it was in my presentation from a couple of weeks ago. So when we talk about aligning with council goals, we talk about conservative revenues and realistic expenses. And that's the fancy way of when in doubt, leave it out on the revenue side. If we weren't sure that it was going to be included, we did not include it on the revenue side. When in doubt on the expense side, we included it to make sure that we could account for that. So this is kind of your all-in expenses and making sure that we are confident on the revenue side. Yes, sir. Yeah, so the council goals will be in my presentation tomorrow. I can certainly give it to you in advance to see it. It was in my presentation when I did the state of the town. And there was another presentation where that's been in there. So it's floating in the internet, if you will, but I can get it for you directly. So you can have that. Yes, but easier for me probably just to email it to you too. Yeah. Yeah. And then we also obviously want to provide stability. One of our main things was obviously recruiting and filling the vacant positions we have, and then restoring integrity of the finances. Tony McFarland, as you know, we introduced him as our new director of finance. He's been here, I think, all of 3 weeks. And he's getting on board. Cindy is literally passing the torch to him tomorrow. And Cindy will return as admin services manager, and Tony will be our director of finance. And Tony has been doing a deep dive into the finances, into the audit, and the different pieces, and he will chime in, if you will, as necessary. So what were some of the budget assumptions? So what's included in the budget? Basically, we have 20 FTEs, 20 full-time equivalent positions. There's not an increase there. Tomorrow, I will go over the org chart and share the org chart of the different departments and the layout. We made changes to some of the titles. We made changes in some of the departments. We added an assistant director of planning and building, for example, in the planning and building department. We changed some of the titles from management position to a tech position to allow for customer service, and I'll go over those different pieces. But a net no FTE change in the budget assumption. We do have a sustainability grant that we received in the tune of $75,000. That's in there. 40,000 of that does help pay for staffing related to sustainability. We also added some CIP projects, which I will talk about. The user fee study, the cost of the user fee study and the Nexus fee, Nexus study, that's included in our budget assumptions. Our general election in November, that's included in the budget. The EPIC, which is Emergency Preparedness in Communities, we had a $5,000 contribution to that group. They requested a $15,000. I'm highlighting it just for purposes for the public to see. And then the committee budgets, all of the committees, whether you're Parks and Rec or ASCC or Planning, or whatever committee or commission has a budget, we basically just roll that over for now. And if there's an increase or decrease needs to happen, you can do that in the next 3 months. What's not included in our budget assumptions are the costs for revenue enhancement, as we talked about, as Finance Committee goes off into your different work groups. There's obviously different costs for different things. Some things for revenue enhancement might have a $10,000 price tag. Some things might have a $200,000 price tag. Those are not in there yet. Also, enhanced security. There's been a lot of discussion about flock cameras and other cameras, license plate readers. That's not included in the budget. It can be in the final, but basically we need time in the next 3 months to explore those options. Special election costs, if the special election was to fall into next fiscal year, that cost is not included. You can certainly add that in the next 3 months based on Finance Committee's recommendations. And then an unfunded or wish list, that's something that we can put together as well. So those are some of the big picture items of what's included and what's not as far as our assumptions. As I go down, I'm going to talk about some of the town finances. This was based on my last presentation. We are a $12 million agency, $8 million in general fund. When we talk about what's under our control as an agency, we talk about general fund, and my presentation focuses solely on general fund for now. There has been a lot of discussion and or interest in open space committee. I am not making any changes or recommendations regarding open space committee tomorrow. I would like to wait to have that discussion and analysis with Finance Committee. So I wanted to make sure that we don't mix the two. We're just talking about general fund. We talked about the structural deficit that was budgeted for last year was about $900,000. That was the budgeted number. What we understood is we were thinking about a $1.2 million deficit. That has since grown in that if we go all in, if you spend all of your expenses, we get the revenue that we're expecting. Tony, Cindy, and I, and Corey have put this together and basically are estimating about a $1.9 million deficit. And I'll explain what goes in there as well. We typically do not spend all of our expenses. We don't spend 100%. As you know, we don't spend 100% of our salaries. So I don't expect this 1 point number to actually come to fruition. I think you might spend about 85% of that in any given year. We don't budget for vacancy savings. That's a philosophy that sometimes you do incorporate. I did not put a vacancy savings in here. Tony did not put a vacancy savings, and Cindy has not typically had a vacancy savings in past budgets.
Hey, George and Sharif, haven't we run any other questions? Do we want to go through this or do we want to put some questions?
Your call.
Is it better for you to get through a little bit more and then we save up questions? Would that?
We can do
help
that.
a little?
That's fine.
Yeah,
Okay.
I just write them down and let's Sharif get through the overview and then we'll
Okay.
go back.
So what have I done as your town manager? What did staff do? And what I mean by staff, we're talking about the executive team, assistant town manager, you have Tony, you have Cindy, you have others. And what did we do in our staff actions to already mitigate from this? Because you can imagine when we started this budget conversation or this analysis 2 weeks ago, we had a $3 million deficit. And as we're going through and making recommendations to pare down, we did a couple different things. One of the things I wanted to mention is we are completing or on the tail end of our reorg. You've heard me talk about refresh, reorg for many, many months. That analysis is basically done with the exception of planning and building. And we're going to talk today, we'll talk tomorrow, that the building and planning fiscal model does not work. At one point, we had too many staff. At another point, we had too many consultants. At some point, you might say we had not enough staff and too many consultants, but our consultant fees are too high. Our staffing did not match the customer service that the community expected. And so we need to take a look back. And in these next 3 months, we're going to take a hard dive into the building and planning model. How many staff do we need? What should we contract out for? What should be in-house? And all those different pieces. And I'll show you the numbers that are related to that. We also made some changes to Public Works, which has just been in the last couple of weeks. And that with the departure of Howard Young as our Director of Public Works, we are going to change that position to a town engineer. And that town engineer position will have a certificate and some different duties as well. We then added customer support staff, and that's where we talk about adding technicians. So we have a development technician up front. We now have a finance technician, as you know, in our budget, and we now have an engineering technician. So we have different folks that are answering the phones, customer support, resident support, that we didn't necessarily have. So we changed that model as well without changing the 20 FTEs moving forward. We increased the investment earnings, and you know that we've talked about this many, many times, and I'll use this. This is the bill factor in that we did make our change to our investment earnings. And because we've made changes to investment earnings, we have significantly increased the investment return. And we can now say that we can now budget significantly to the tune of $300,000, $400,000, $500,000 more a year in interest income. And so that was a major change that we made by moving those. I think it was at the end $11.5 million that we moved to Schwab. And that makes a significant difference in our interest income moving forward. We also changed the benefit structure for retirement plans. The town of Portola Valley was paying the match for classic PERS employees. So not only the employer portion, but also the employee portion. When I came on board as town manager, I basically discontinued that for new staff. We still have existing staff that have that, but new staff, we do not have that. And that's a significant savings to the town. We also reduced our legal fees in the budget in that the legal fees was budgeted at $180,000. If you recall from my last meeting with the state of the town, we're actually at a running rate of $420,000. So more than double. Obviously, there are many factors that happen this fiscal year with the housing element, with a potential lawsuit, with other things that happen through the town that I don't think will get repeated. And so I'm challenging ourselves and the town and council, and I reduced that down to $245,000. So it's going from $180,000, if you will, to $245,000 instead of the running rate now, which is $400,000, because we simply just can't support that dollar amount. We are holding positions. So obviously, as we get through this budget and we start looking at the deficit and the deficit's growing and growing, we do have a vacant position, which is the director of planning and building right now that we're recruiting for. I'm going to put a soft hold, if you will, on that, a hold on that position, not hire for that position, because that can then in turn save the town for now, at least. That position fully loaded is about $250,000. And so I'm putting a hold on that position as we move forward. And then we also are looking at our consultant fees. The biggest portion of spending for the town on our consultant fees is within planning and building. And we have to take a look at that. And we have to come back to council in September with a new number, if you will, for that piece, because that is too expensive for us. We cannot sustain that amount. As Tony got on board as our new director of finance and took a deep dive into the building and planning model, and as we looked at it with Cindy and staff and everybody else, we did notice that we are not billing correctly as well for our building and planning fees. And so we have to take a look and make sure that we are performing the right cost recovery, if we will, for our building and planning department. Because not only should building and planning fund themselves, but it should also bring in a larger amount. And so that model is what I'm talking about, that the entire model needs to be looked at. The last piece is the reduced revenues, or the last two pieces, reduced revenues. We did reduce property tax, and we sat here last time. I had my presentation, we talked in finance, and we had Paula come in, and we talked about vehicle license fees going away, and it was $400,000, and then we're selling less houses. It's kind of like the comedy of errors of all these different pieces. Now, last week, the state of California, the governor put vehicle license fees back into the budget. So because he put it back into the budget, we put ours back into the budget. And so the vehicle license fee portion is back in there. What is still in property tax, which is by far the biggest driver of our revenue reduction, is still selling less houses than in a normal year. So your rate of growth is decreasing. So your growth is not as high as it was normally. And then the second piece is the ERAF, which is the educational fund that we had talked about. Every year, the governor says we're going to get ERAF funds or we're not going to get ERAF funds. Sometimes they come in, sometimes they don't. For the town of Portola Valley, they have come in pretty consistently. However, to be safe, we are budgeting ERAF at 50% of what comes in. So basically, in layman's terms, for us when we talk, if it comes in, fine. If it doesn't, it's gravy. And so we make sure that we just get that in there. But we're not comfortable, Tony, I, Cindy, and Corey, budgeting ERAF at full budget, just because every year it's so volatile. And this may be the year that it goes away, which they've been saying for a very long time. So if you were to ask Paula, our consultant, if you ask folks, no one will guarantee that the ERAF is coming. VLF is actually required by law. And if they don't include it in the budget, they have to pay us back, I think, with interest. So that's a little bit of a different argument there. The last piece is we did add CIP projects, in that we talked last time about the CIP fund that we have. We have a dedicated fund for CIP. We do have projects that are slated to get done this year that we believe do need to get done. And also just the argument of a $1 million project now is going to cost $1.2 million next year, $1.5 million after that, just the costs are so high. So we'll talk about those CIP projects that we have added. And as I mentioned, one of the CIP projects is the infrastructure upgrade for IT and also for town hall. Actuals versus budget, I think I went over this without going over the slide, but basically when we talk about our projections for salaries, this year's at 2.55 million. Our budgeted projection for next year is 2.7 million. This year was at 2.2 million, obviously because we haven't had all our full staffing. Our legal fees, the budget was 180. The running rate right now, if we were to end the year at the same rate, it's about $430,000. My challenge for us as a town is to bring that back down to 245,000. Consultants are projected at 550,000 for the year. The budget is 620. I think we're going to hit that 620 mark. We did not reduce that because we do not have a handle on all of those expenses yet. But my task and my ask for council and for staff is that the 620 number actually goes down. I would love to see this at 400,000 as an example with a different model for planning and building, because most of the consultant fees that we pay are in planning and building. The other categories were within budget. And then obviously the one last piece is that the ARPA funds have been depleted. They're no longer here. So any existing expenses that we had that we're paying with ARPA now becomes general fund. So when we talk about our CIP projects, every year we put out CIP projects. Some are larger than others. The main one that we usually do every year is a street resurfacing project. On any given year, it's about $200,000 up to $400,000 in general fund. The rest is matched or supplemented by Measure A or Measure W or different pieces. That's the biggest project of the year dollar-wise. It's not necessarily the biggest project general fund-wise. You can see there's some storm drain repairs. There's some parking and safety elements here. There's a town hall boiler for $25,000. We are requesting a pool vehicle, a used vehicle for town hall staff, especially in our building and planning department. We do have a used Nissan Leaf that's running on its last legs. I think when you plug it in, it's getting like 60 miles total to a charge. So it's not something you can take like to the county and back. It's good for kind of putting around town, but that is in there for town hall. And then there's a town hall infrastructure improvement of $100,000. That's a new project. And that's basically to get community hall and the town hall on badge access and badge reader access so that we don't have keys, and then we can kind of eliminate some of these keys that are floating around everywhere. But basically have badge access not only for us, but also for the community. If someone's renting community hall, you can hand them a badge. It could be good for 4 hours and then the badge just turns off and you don't get access. That's in there. We're also looking to add insulation to town hall and to soundproof town hall. We haven't made any adjustments to it since its beginning. And so that's that town hall infrastructure piece. The last one that is obviously the biggest piece here is the sheriff's substation. The sheriff's substation, which is the facilities yard improvement project, I guess you would call it. We have a bid of at about 550,000, 560,000. But this is, if you will, envision the town hall, the maintenance yard, pulling that out about 15, 20 feet and making a sheriff's substation so it's independent of the garage that's there. There would be a space for the sheriff substation. It'd be a community-facing office, if you will. And then it would also have a space for the town engineer and for town staff. Currently, town staff have basically a cubicle in there. The sheriff has a cubicle in there, and then we actually store manure in the garage. And so it's not very conducive for folks to be in there. All of these CIP projects are proposed to come out of the CIP fund, not from expenses for the year, if you will. So that's the dedicated fund. Obviously, that fund would get depleted, but the main argument would be that this $500,000 or $600,000 project would then be $750, $800 million very quickly, as you've seen some of the other projects. Last time we talked about the town reserves. I will talk about this tomorrow. I am updating this. Just got this a couple hours ago, so we will update this for tomorrow's purposes. I am keeping in here the roadmap to PV Thrive, talking about the 3 years to call on us to figure out a way to have a balanced budget. Obviously, we can look at all our expenses. At the end of the day, we're not going to be able to cut $1.9 million in expenses. We can there's certainly room there to look at. But at the end of the day, we do need a new funding stream. And that funding stream, I think, is going to come out of a multitude of areas. And that's what Finance Committee has been tasked with. Same slides here for the 3-year outlook, the PV Thrive. Some of the measures that we're talking about having Finance Committee's leadership on: user fee study, Nexus study, UUT, parcel tax, annexations, land sale, and all those different pieces here. So basically the recommendations, my recommendation, staff recommendation, is that we adopt the preliminary budget tomorrow with the understanding that we will come back to council and Finance Committee, obviously, with a September revision on both the revenue side and the expense side. We would like to immediately begin our user fee study, Nexus study, obviously, so we can capture new revenue moving forward. And then our continued engagement with Finance Committee over the summer for our revenue enhancement measures, our reorg of reserves, and other recommendations. I do have here as the final piece, explore fiscal emergency. I am not asking town council tomorrow to vote on a fiscal emergency or act on a fiscal emergency. I'm basically introducing this as a concept of a fiscal emergency. And basically the state of California requires municipalities to declare a fiscal emergency if you'd like to bring something up for a revenue vote or a vote of the town residents. And so I believe at a later date, I would probably say August, September, there may be the need, and I think there will be the need, to call for a fiscal emergency so that we can then call for a special election for revenue enhancement measures. And so it's basically, in a nutshell, very simply, and I'm oversimplifying it, of what a fiscal emergency entails. It doesn't turn on a switch. It doesn't change anything. At the end of the day, when it comes to funding, when it comes to grants, when it comes to different pieces, as Tony has mentioned many times, what really matters is getting caught up on our audits and getting caught up on our last 3 fiscal years. So we have that history so that we know where we're at. If asked tomorrow or today, how much money do we have in reserves? How much money do we have? When will we run out? As an example, we don't have that confidence yet to tell you. Tony can't tell you, I can't tell you, Cindy can't tell you until we have our audited financial statements, which are obviously in the works. Because once we know where we are and how the year finished, we can then tell you. Correct me if I'm wrong, George, you just mentioned this, and Tony, 2021, which we have the draft for, did show a very small surplus, right? So for the sake of conversation, we broke even in 2021. We fully expect 21, 22 is the year that it flipped and that we then started showing a deficit. So you have 21, 22, 22, 23, and the year that we're in now, 23, 24, where the deficit is increasing year over year. And then it's increasing again for next year. And so obviously we need to stop that deficit, figure out some revenue generation, rein in all of our expenses to be able to have a balanced budget moving forward. So that's basically my presentation. It's basically saying what's in the budget, what's not, what's a placeholder, what's not, what are we confident on, what are we not confident on, what's still moving, if you will, and then ask for Finance Committee's feedback and recommendations moving forward. Cindy is ready and able and willing. We would like to show you the OpenGov system and actually show you how we budgeted, what's in there, how we thought through property tax, for example, how we thought through some of the other pieces, but we can actually show you the OpenGov system that ties to those stories that are online for us and the public to access.
Okay, thank you, Sharif, for that. Before we get to that, why don't we have questions from the committee?
So I'd like to go back, Sharif, to one of the first things here, and that's property tax revenue. In your staff report, you indicate that the budget is anticipating a decrease in property tax revenues associated with a decline in home sales in 23 versus 22. One of the benefits of looking at the minutes that you attached, which were from March rather than May, was that included Paula Cohn's presentation. And in the minutes, it states that Paula Cohn told us that property value changes in 23 versus 22 were positive $230 million, where they increased by 5.39%. That seems like the opposite of what you're saying here in your first sentence. And even if it were 0, I don't understand why the property taxes would decrease. If anything, they go up by the 1%, which increases the assessed values every year.
What we're looking at is the delta between the growth year over year. So the growth for last calendar year is not growing as fast as the years before. And so we're reflecting a decrease in revenue based on the total tax roll, which is that $230 million. We receive a portion of that. And so the growth is not as high as the prior years. In prior years, I believe the growth was 7% and 8%. Now it's 5% and 4%. And so that delta is then your loss of revenue.
Right, but this doesn't say that the rate of change is negative. You're saying that the property tax revenue are, and I don't agree. That's the first thing you're
The
writing
growth
in
rate.
this memo, and it's like, that can't possibly be true. Even without Paula Coon's statement that actually we did have an increase in the number, or we had positive number of sales and therefore increased roll.
Go ahead, Tony.
So last year's budget did not have the benefit of a report to base the numbers on. So the numbers from last year's budget might have been overstated. So the numbers we have in the budget this year are based on a report from, it's that, the number is from the report.
Yeah, I don't have a problem with whatever number you chose. You're saying that that's based on Paula Cohn's statement. I'm just saying that what you're writing here is not accurate. And that doesn't seem like a good way to go to the council with inaccurate statements on the first page.
I agree. Help me write the narrative for tomorrow because the number is the number, but what is the message behind the number, Bill, so that we can say, because we're selling less houses. The number that the revenue that we're receiving is less than prior years. This is based on now an actual report where
No, I don't think that's right. I think what is reduced is it's below trend line and below
Below trend line.
forecast. And a
Okay.
lot of times when people, particularly in government or any large scaled enterprise, you look at your trend line and you make all your projections, and then anything that falls short of that, you say we're earning less revenue. But that's the planted axiom is that the trend line and the assumed growth is lower. So everyone's right. I think it depends on the frame. The more common use is Ken's, which is our tax revenue per se isn't going down. It's just not increasing as fast as we would expect and had happened in the past.
Yeah, note taken. So I will repeat for me what I'd like to say tomorrow. Is we've adjusted property tax.
The
Right.
property tax is based on what Paula Cohn's.
That's what Paula Cohn told us.
Estimates.
Yeah.
As to what it would be.
Yeah, and we also get a county estimate, which matches what Paula. So,
Half of life is vocabulary, and it's just which assumption you use.
I would like to also just comment at this point, is as you know, from when Paula was here, I'm interested in TEA, as to why we're not getting 7%. And the 7%, I've done some research on the web and I found a explanation of, TEA and allocation of, property taxes. Unfortunately, it's dated 2006, so it's old. But at that point, it said that we should have been getting 7%, and adjusted only for ERAS, not for triple flip and not for VLF. Now, I don't know if that's still the case 18 years later.
we do have a new analysis, and Tony, I believe you have it, the TEA analysis from Paula that we can now share with Finance Committee, because we didn't have that at the last meeting.
Right, and the analysis that you shared with us just showed 7% minus a big number for ERAF, and it equaled the number that Paula was saying. And it didn't say how that big number for ERAF got arranged.
Yeah, we didn't include that analysis that she had done. I just focused on the numbers that she had provided, for secured and unitary. And then, but again, it's the numbers last year's budget might have been a little bit overstated because there was no report to back it up. So it was based on a projection of previous year. So you might have had a 4% increase last year, or maybe a 7% increase last year in the budget. And then, but actually it came in at 4.
So the explanation that you brought us up to date with regard to the VLF and the $50,000. We now believe we're going to get that money. Is that what I heard you say?
The latest as of now is that VLF is included in the state budget and our budget, yes.
But
And our budget therefore is still $1.9 million. It could have gone as high as 2.35.
Absolutely, yes.
Okay,
and the governor still has line item veto, so he could still take it.
okay. So again, I'm not an expert in TEA. Paula hopefully is. I don't know if she actually has other clients who are TEA tested, TEA entities. But in 2006, VLF was irrelevant if you were a TEA city.
Yeah, I was with the city of Saratoga, Saratoga was a TEA city, but it was, they had to go through the legislature, Jim Beal's office, to actually make Santa Clara County enforce the fee.
Well, we have to sue.
Yeah, other cities have sued, when I was in Scotts Valley, they sued Santa Cruz County to get the
Right.
fee off.
Yeah.
Yeah.
San Mateo was the only county in the state that
Right.
did not enforce
Yeah,
TEA
and,
when it was first brought up
Right.
some years ago.
and Bill, I'd be more than happy to invite Paula again to a finance committee meeting and we can talk about specifically TA if we like. I think it'd be timely to do that. It's not part of our contract, but it's not a huge cost to have her on Zoom to explain this to us. She did do a TEA analysis. We have that analysis. In her analysis, the punchline was is that we've been made whole, if you will, but it doesn't say that whether it's right or wrong, right? And we can definitely take a look at that piece. So,
It would be good, given a large part of our structural deficit is the county reassessing, reallocating overhead for public safety contract. If at the same time they're not allocating the appropriate amount of TEA, well, then we may have, as one of our options, the course that Scotts Valley and others have pursued, which is to get them to change it.
I can certainly do that.
So just so I'm clear, so there's no TEA in this budget? proposal?
There is, there is,
But it's part of the whole number.
Okay.
yeah. Because we are a TEA town, we do get the TEA revenue. It is
So the
included.
question is more, are we getting the right
Are we getting the right amount? Yeah.
The only other item that I wanted to ask you about was you talked about the capital improvement projects. And when I look at the fund activity summary, the capital projects fund starts with a zero balance, ends with a zero balance, but we spend $1.177 million. Where does that actually come from? 'Cause you said it was actually being covered by a
It's coming from.
Fund.
It is general fund money
No, we
It's
count
set
for
aside.
capital fund expenditures through the general.
So it is a general fund expenditure.
It's a general fund expenditure, but those funds had been set aside for the purposes of capital budget. But yeah, make no mistake, it's still general fund at the end of the day.
Okay.
Yeah.
So if that is true, then I'm a little concerned that our general purpose funds that we have set aside and built up over the years is getting much smaller.
Exactly right.
And it's down to like $2.5 million and started out the year, we think at about $5.5 million, which means we have about one more year of runway before we can't operate.
Yeah, and just something to clarify.
Bill stole my thunder by that. But yes, that is the question of the day. Bill. That's absolutely right. It's how much general fund do we have for how long and what do we want to spend it on?
Yeah, and we should be aware that my belief or recollection, correct me on the committee, the other members who've been here for a while, that we have a town policy that will maintain general fund balance at 60% of the annual general fund budget, which would be roughly $4 million, and we're going to go below that this year.
Yeah. We're already.
We're already below that. So
Okay. Yeah,
Yeah.
so everyone, town council, everybody needs to know that we're violating this policy. And partly because we still lack the audited financials, that the lack of those audited financials sort of obscured exactly how things were flowing through the last couple of years.
correct.
Let me jump in here because I'm one of two people sort of focusing on the reserve. reserve question. One recommendation I have for you before tomorrow night with council is you do the actual calculation of what whether the reserve policy is currently being met or not. If I use the numbers that I pulled out of what we had available to us since last week, I picked the following numbers out. We normally do a calculation based on the annual, the adopted plan expected expenditures. Hasn't been adopted yet, but you have a proposal. It may change, but it's the number you have now. The number I wrote down was 8,683,381. Tony, you're nodding your head. You remember where I got that from, right?
Yes.
Is that the correct number we would use for this calculation?
That's the general fund expense.
Isn't that the number we would use to do the,
It'll be 60% of them.
okay. So the unrestricted reserves that you project as of the end of June may change a little. Unrestricted reserves, 5,445,940. Does that number sound familiar too?
That's the number that's on the chart, yes.
Okay.
But again, we don't know what that number is going to be because we still have 3 years of financial information that needs to be audited. We need to make sure that all the financial transactions have been posted in the
Right.
ledgers.
Right. So there's a lot of asterisks on these numbers, but these are the numbers that you have in this report that you're going to show the council, and we're going to try to make decisions and judgments based on these. The way we normally do that calculation then is we say, what percent of those annual planned expenditures of 8.68 million do we have unrestricted reserves for? So if I take the 5.44 million over the 8.68, I get 62.7%. Does that math sound correct?
Yeah.
So if I was taking the numbers from this, measuring it as of the way as of last week, you thought it would be at the end of June, we would be in compliance with the current policy, which is to be above 60%. I then did the following. I took your projections from this of where we might be at the end of next year on the unrestricted reserves. And I found a number of 2,298,223. Sound familiar?
Yeah.
Okay. And then I did the following math. I said, let's say, it's highly unlikely, our actual planned expenditures at next year when we're doing this exercise, we're exactly the same as what you're expecting this year. In other words, we were going to spend no additional money, just exactly the same amount. Would we be in compliance? And you do the math now, the 2.98 million over that same number, you're down at 26.5%. So we're now way under. So based on that simple number, you'd say we're above the target mark now, but we're going to be below it, and we're going to probably be continuously sliding down it during the course of the year. And in fact, it'll probably be worse than that because expenses a year
Correct.
from now, you bring us are going to be higher than what we're.
Tony and I actually had this conversation, and we actually went one step further and said that we're already out of compliance. Not
Okay.
that we're
So I
already
would
at the 60%.
recommend, so it's clear, absolutely clear to the council, this issue, and use the numbers you are using in a report they can see, because if you start referring to another number, or it's got changes to it, you lose your audience, and you don't want to lose your audience on something like this. Start with something like what, in my simplistic way, I could tie it to a number you're putting on a piece of paper. You can explain further about what that number means or doesn't mean, but allows them to do the math. I think we've always submitted, I know Cindy did this, didn't we do this every year? We always had that calculation when we submitted this proposed budget to the council so they can see. I think in the past years, we've always been above this number. So it's not apparent in this that we're going to be in trouble. It's when you click over and start thinking, a year from now, what's going to be happening. So that's just a recommendation. I have another comment, and this is unrelated to this. It's about, meeting materials and planning and public comment and so forth. This was available, this package, which I think all of us go through in quite a bit of detail. I'd like to go through in detail to, identify what's going on, come up with questions so that when we come here, I can listen to what you're saying and not be, looking at the material for this first time and bringing my calculator and so forth. I can't multitask well that way. My presumption is that members of the community would like the same benefit. So my first question is, was this package as it existed with, all the assumptions and bumps and things are going to change in it, was this made available so that someone could go online and look for a member of the community? I didn't find it. Maybe it was there, but I didn't see it. The only way I saw it is because it was attached in an email, I think that George sent to the committee. But everybody in town should be able to see this. I know it's preliminary, but it's, we're talking about it in the Brown Act meeting. I think this kind of stuff should be available for people to see. So was there a specific reason why that wasn't done, or
No,
was it
it
just
was.
overlooked?
So it was available to the public. There was a link at the end of the third page of the council report where we did provide the link that went out on Friday. What I can tell you is Friday is not good enough, right? 72 hours is not good enough for us to take a look at this.
I don't know how
And
people
so-
find, to be honest, I'm not sure people can easily navigate to that. I didn't know I was supposed to go look there to find
Yeah.
it. I only got it because George was kind enough to send it to me. But, there could be 100 people out in the town. They don't know.
Yeah, in the council report, the very last paragraph, it says, here is the link for OpenGov. You can click on it. We actually had a little disclaimer that said the link
Right.
wasn't working and will be updated.
I know there's
So-
reasons, I'm stepping past, I know there's reasons for why this, what I'm saying is, it's got to be easier for people to find it. They've got to be able to go into the search box and type it in. I've got to be able to click on the link for finance, where we have a list of the last, 15 years of budgets. You got to be able to come up and pull up the proposed, not yet adopted fiscal year. We've got to do a better job, I'm saying, of making it easy for people in town to find the same stuff
And
we're looking at. Because
I'm-
I'm sitting out in an audience right now, I'd be very frustrated. I haven't had a chance to see this. I had to look at this. You were showing a presentation that was different. I hadn't seen it before. I don't know about you. I like, if somebody has a presentation they're going to give, I like to be able to see it before I come in, because I like to study it and learn so I can ask intelligent questions and give better feedback. I can do that maybe on some of this. I can't do it on anything you just showed in the last 20 minutes because I didn't know it was available and it wasn't available.
And I'm in full agreement with you 100%. You're preaching to the choir. You have a new finance director who's been here 3 weeks. You have myself who has promised that we're going to get this.
Sharif, this is the first time it's happened before he had anything to do with it. I've had this issue on previous meetings. Now, if you have an outside speaker, like when we had the woman who was the speaker from, it would have been nice to have her stuff like a couple days in
I
advance
signed the
too.
contract an hour before the finance committee meeting. That's
Right.
part of the things that we're working through. And so what I'm telling you is I'm in agree with you 100% with everything. Our finances are not good enough. The way we present are not good enough. The way the public receives them is not good enough. The way we post is not good enough. It is not okay for a town to get the preliminary budget 72 hours before council sees it. This should be a conversation that we have in March. It should be a conversation that we have in April. All the committees never even had opportunity to present their budget. There was nothing in this budget that was done correctly. We did it last minute. You did it with somebody who happens to know finance, who were able to do it. You had Tony jump in his first day and do that. So what I'm telling you and promising you for next year is you are preaching to the choir. I guarantee you this will be completely different next year.
I don't care how
The
bad
way
the
we
numbers are.
post, the way
You're
we-
missing, I think you're missing half my point. Whatever you're going to come in here and show us and talking to these microphones to the community, I expect, and I would think people in town want to expect, they could see it 1 or 2 days in advance and be able to find it easily and not be hampered. I've been on this committee for 22 years. We always have a discussion about the proposed budget before it goes to council.
And I'm telling you, I
22 years.
agree. I
Am I-
agree.
Is that correct?
I
mean,
am
come
in
on, guys.
agreement with you.
This is not rocket. This is just how we do stuff. This is not about getting the numbers right. I know it's almost an impossible task, but you have to be able to release stuff 24 to 48 hours so that members of the community can find it.
And I
Here's-
am saying I agree with you.
But the point is, we don't have time to work on getting it right. We're going to be in financial straits pretty quick. We're probably going to be going to the community asking for additional tax revenues or a number of other things. And these people got to believe that everything we're seeing, as soon as we see it, they can see too, or they're not going to, they're not going to trust us.
I agree with you. My number one priority is the fiscal integrity of the finances of Portola Valley. That is why I hired Christian Company. That's why we're doing the 3 years of audits. That's why in 9 months, we have caught up in 2 fiscal years out of the 4 fiscal years that are behind. We cannot go any faster. We have a finance director who started 15 days ago.
George,
We have not finished our budget. I am in agreement with you that this will be done much earlier,
thank you.
much sooner, and more transparent. I don't know what else I can say to you as your town manager. Please tell me what else you would like me to say to the
Well,
public that
well,
this isn't good
Thank you for the
enough.
invitation. We'll have another.
I am in
conversation.
agreement with you. This is not good enough. I have told you since the day I got here, this is not good enough.
Okay,
What we're
let's move
doing
on.
is not good enough.
Let's move on. George, are we going to have a finance committee meeting to review the 21 audit, which I guess I don't know if it was a final or a draft that we saw.
It's a draft and it was sent to you folks and it's one of the agenda items is to look at that.
Generally, again, this is what we've done in the past. We have had, as part of a regular finance committee meeting, a review of the audit letter. We've had a chance to read in advance, ask questions. Sometimes there's been a representative who's come to the meeting. Are we going to do any version of that this year?
It's a good question. I don't know the plan for approving all of the various audits. It would be ideal to be able to go through them one at a time before they go final.
Why are you not sure we will be able to?
Well, I just haven't covered that yet. I was focusing on this being a special meeting on the budget emergency.
Okay. Is that your decision about whether you request that, or is that Sharif's decision?
Well, I think working together, Sharif and I would decide on that.
Okay, I think what our town is going to expect, they expect audits to get done, but when they get done, I think they expect that we're called the Finance and Audit Committee. We've absolutely got to spend an hour together going through an audit, making sure we understand it, what it covered, what they didn't cover. It's whether everything is perfect or not. We've done that every year. That's what people expect us to do. We can't call ourselves the Finance and Audit Committee unless we do that. So that's got to be a high priority because we all care about getting audits completed and signed off and presented to town council. We usually do that before it goes to the council, correct? And then they accept
That's
how it
right.
works,
And, and my understanding is this audit is at draft right now at this point. It was just ready for being sent to us just a few days ago.
Okay. I'm sorry, I'm taking more time from other people. I had a few other things, but sure, feel free to move on.
Other questions?
I just want to go back to something that Ken started on, because I think I understand where part of the budget gap is. As I understand it, in the previous budget cycle, there was an expectation that there was going to be more home sales, and therefore there was going to be a higher revenue base in terms of taxes that go to the county, then come back to the town. But that didn't happen because, because interest rates went up and then mortgages got more expensive. So there was a significant reduction in home sales in Portola Valley. So it's fundamentally, is that correct?
Yes, that's part of that.
So if that
Analysis.
is correct, I'm brand new to the committee, but I would have thought, particularly because Prop 13 does have a pretty straightforward increase on property taxes. I think, and you mentioned it was 1%. I think it's 2%. It's 2%. So I would have thought that the budgeting process on the revenue side is pretty straightforward. It's 2% increase. I realize that Prop 13 is a max of 2%, but put 2% in there, it's 2%. It's 2%. And then on top of that, there are other, there's other taxes that go along with that, whether sales tax, and there's also other things for particularly planning and approvals. But for just the real estate portion, I realize it wasn't done in the past. I'm hoping that in the future, and I haven't dug into the details of the upcoming fiscal year, but I'm hopeful that the town is not in a position of trying to guess what's going to happen to the real estate market, because puts the town in a pretty precarious position of being semi-real estate speculators. So I mean, again, I realize that it's going to go to the town council tomorrow. There's probably nothing that can be done about it at this moment, but I would suggest for the future, whether it's not this year or next year at least, is to not put the town in the position of trying to speculate what's going to happen with the residential housing market. That's a kind of fundamental point. Ken hit on it head on. It's more than just a semantic question. It is how do you do the budget? How do you budget the revenue? Now, if the market takes off and all sorts of sales happen, and then it jacks up the base upon which that 2% then gets increased, okay, that's kind of surplus. But from a baseline, I think that for sure we should not be in a position of trying to prognosticate what's going to happen.
That's
with the
absolutely
real estate
right.
market.
And that's why we have the consultant. That's why we have Paula Cohn, who's the expert, if you will, for the state. The town of Portola Valley did not have that before I came on board. I contracted out with that because this was the first town where I did not have a property tax consultant help me build the budget to be able to provide all the analysis, all of the 15-year history, if you will, going back for every town, the analysis in comparison to different counties, to different states and different pieces. So it's not going to be guesswork moving forward. We'll have reports. Those reports will be public. They'll be shared with the finance committee, and then we'll know months before what that number is going to be. So it's not a surprise, if you will. This year, we're getting back to integrity, if you will, because now we have a number to base it on. We have data to base it on based on our consultants' analysis.
Okay, I mean, again, I don't think it's actually shouldn't be that complicated. It should be pretty much almost, and I would suggest that it be assuming that no housing sales take place, that it is simply what the tax rolls are, multiply that by 1.02 so that you get to what the next year's tax is. I would think that on the revenue side, that'd be good. That's one of three things, and I will have to leave at 5:30. So that was definitely the first thing that Ken mentioned. The next thing that Bill mentioned, I 100% agree with, is that as I understand the function of this committee is to really provide a forum, an opportunity for a group of citizens of Portola Valley to review and recommend for approval to the town council just two things. One is the budget, and two is a review of the audit. That's it. And I would absolutely agree that we need adequate time on both, recognizing that there are absolutely a lot of constraints, but particularly as it relates to audits that will be upcoming, even if they're draft form. Yeah, so just have a bit of time on that. And then the third thing, to kind of preempt something that we for sure we're going to be talking about, but it may happen after I leave at 5:30, is actually where do we actually like fund this gap that we've got? And actually one of the things that has its target on its back, unfortunately, is this open space fund. So the letter that we got dated May 28th from the Open Space Committee, I mean, I read it. I mean, I am similarly alarmed. I would wholeheartedly agree with what is stated in this letter, that I would hope and think that those funds are sacrosanct. Those are the expectation that is not going to be used to be rated in the event of a fiscal emergency. So that's the last thing I'll say on that.
Excuse me, just adding, this is Steve, just adding to that point in terms of where is the money that can maybe help bridge this gap? And obviously you have the revenue side, but on the cost side, just curious what has gone into the decision-making on the capital improvement projects. That's a fairly large bucket. Are any of those considered reasonably delayed, deferred, or canceled even? And have there been discussions around that?
There are certainly many of them can be delayed or canceled. It's just a matter of, do we pay for them now or pay for them later? So when we talk about the IT upgrade, when we talk about town hall infrastructure, we talk about a town vehicle, all those things can be delayed, certainly. There's just a future cost to that. The sheriff's substation is completely up to council's discretion if they want to have a sheriff's substation or not. We did receive a $1.2 million credit on our sheriff's contract from the sheriff. And in very direct terms, she said and mentioned that she would like to have a decent spot for her sheriffs to sit at, but they're not sitting in a room that has manure in the next door that's being stored. And so my commitment as town manager is we'll get you a decent spot. We don't have a spot for them. I explored spots with Woodside Fire. I explored renting facilities, I explored having them at town hall. We don't have the space for it. So they need to go somewhere and that's going to cost, but that's up to council to decide. That's up to us to decide. We can come up with a $300,000 or $400,000 solution is fine. Want to put them in a trailer? That's fine. Or you can do the $600,000 piece. For me as town manager, I'm basically bringing it as a point of discussion because I think it needs to happen at some point. In theory, we are a 200-year town, and at some point we need a sheriff's substation. And I would like a comfortable spot for residents to go and file a report or speak to the sheriff or meet with them, and a comfortable spot for them to be. So that's certainly up for discussion. All of these there are some smaller amounts I think Woodbeg would have to be done. We do need to do our road maintenance, and there's a huge match that comes with that. We don't want to sacrifice that. The other pieces that are 25,000 here, 15 there, I don't think are major issues, but those bigger projects can certainly be looked at.
Yeah, and it's really the bigger projects that are impactful. The smaller stuff, not going to move the needle.
Do we know how often the sheriff would likely be using substation?
Daily, they use it daily. It's just a matter of how much they'd be in the office. You know, some days they might be in there for hours, other days they might be out in the field. It just depends on the day. But we don't have a forward-facing, storefront for the sheriff that folks can come and speak to the sheriff and or file reports or different pieces. So the sheriff, Christina Corpus, mentioned she would really like to have us have a visible, inclusive spot for the sheriff to be part of the community is all.
I guess piggybacking off of that. Isn't the job of finance team to present a balanced budget? So why are we presenting projects to the town council that are exceeding budget? And, and I'm sorry, but the sheriff gave us a credit. The sheriff's charging us more than they've ever charged us before. So I would love to see the credit. We're just, the whole budget process, it's new to me, and I am a new member, but when you run a business, you have a budget. If you can't exceed your budget. So this concept of let's create more revenue by going to the citizens, let's start by showing that we really went after the budget. So a sheriff substation for 600K be the first thing I would redline. I'm just telling you what Chris Rittler would do. Right? I would take that right out. Hey, there's 600K saved. What else are we going to save? Right? So
And I agree,
I'm
and you
just as
can't
a-
take it out without bringing it up for discussion. If I don't put it in there, the discussion doesn't exist.
I
right?
just put, but again, I mean, you have a strong finance background. I know you've been here, a few days only, Tony. You have a strong finance background, but I think the job of a finance team is to present a balanced budget and say, here's the things that you don't get with this budget. Town council, if you want to fund these things, here's the cost to fund them. I just think we're upside down, especially when we're facing this massive deficit. So why not just, I would redo this whole presentation, say this is the balanced budget, and here's the things you don't get with this balanced budget. Town council, you tell us. Sheriff substation, lots of other things. I'm just saying, guys, if we're going to get raising revenues is a bit of a pipe dream. It really is. So can we deal with what we have? Just maybe a mindset shift. I know you got a meeting tomorrow, Sharif, but I would like us as a finance committee to work with you, Tony, to come up with what's our mindset. Are we going to run this thing based on the revenues we can count on? Or are we going to run this thing based on money we don't have?
That's exactly what I want the town to do. Because the 1.9 is not sustainable.
Right?
So
But
what are
right
we
now,
going to
you're
do
not
as a
giving-
town?
You're not giving the town council hard choices. You're basically saying, hey, good news, you get the sheriff substation and we're over budget.
I need town council to say in public to the sheriff of San Mateo County, you're not getting a substation,
No, but
not me.
I think.
And so I need to
think-
bring that for discussion. I'm not saying I want a substation or this, I'm saying this is what has been discussed in the past. This is what we're bringing to the table.
And again, maybe we have to decide on our charter, but I think as a finance committee member, I'd much rather recommend a balanced budget with additional items that we would like to fund. And we're searching for additional funds rather than submit a budget that's way over and then ask other people to be smart enough to say, take that one out, take that one out, take that one out. That's what I think we can help you with on the cost side. Obviously, we have revenue work to do too. And we're going to work on the revenue side, but we can't show up with a deficit.
I can't make one personnel change without the town having a shit fit. Imagine if I came and said, we're gonna lay off 5 staff. We're going to not have building and planning consultants. I'm just saying, and I'm agreeing with you.
Telling you how I
And
would do
so-
it, Sharif.
And so if,
That's how
if
I
we
would-
can't have consultant fees, we don't have enough legal fees, and we're going to lay off 5 or 6 staff, imagine what this town would
I
do
would.
to
I
me.
would- I would.
So
would
I agree with you, and I
applaud-
would love any type of,
I would applaud your effort if you showed up and did that. And I think, then people would start taking responsibility for spending rather than complaining about overspending.
So Chris, let me jump in here. The long, in the most part, happy history of this town is that we have had excess cash, excess reserves well beyond what we need to carry on with the normal business of the town, even during the horrendous 3 or 4 year period in late 1999 when we had all the road washouts from La Nina and so forth. We still got through that because we were able to get, credits and federal money, and we found other sources of money to backfill us. So we've had the happy accident or the management or whatever for a long time to get through. Whether we balanced our budget every year, we always had plenty of reserves. The philosophy in this town, at least until you and I start to work on the reserve policy, is that it may happen. It's okay. It's not a disaster if you have to dip into your reserves. You can't take your reserves down to 0, but if you're still keeping it above 60%, you're in compliance with the current policy. And if you can see you're on a track where over the next year, you're going to be well under 60%, then one question you ask is the one you're asking is what can we cut to stay in budget and stay above 60%? The other question is to say, under current circumstances, is it necessary to maintain a 60% reserve, or is it okay for 1 or 2 years until we sort of digest this big, we hope one time only step function jump in the sheriff's contract? Maybe we drop to 40%, but then we're going to be able to build it back up to 50 or 60%. Maybe using revenue enhancement, we can have that discussion whether we need to do that. But we may decide we may be okay in the future with a 40% because it's well above what the government code suggests now anyway. And if we had a natural disaster, a major fire, whatever, there may be sources of funds that we know from history we can call on that we don't actually have to use our own cash. There's a whole spectrum of things. So I'm with you on the balanced budget. But the history in this town has been, we've been able to acceptably find alternative ways if we ever hit that time when we had to hit the reserve limit, and we're facing it soon after June 30th. So I think there's still, there's still time to get through all this stuff, but that's the correct mindset. Right?
Well, and just to build on everything that's being said, the way I view this sort of situation is, again, from a private sector startup company standpoint. At the current trend rate with this proposed budget, we have 26 months of runway, roughly, until we go cash 0. And when we think about how do we raise more revenue, let's assume we have to raise revenue. That means we have to have an election. It's too late for this November. A year, the next year, November would be 17 months. That's most of the runway. If you did a special election earlier, maybe you could do it in March or something. Okay, that's 9 months away, at which point you have something like 17 months left, and there's like a year lag on property taxes, my understanding, before they really hit the till. And by the way, that supposes that you win the supermajority because the public are behind you and say, yeah, this is the fiscally appropriate thing to do. If you lose, then you sail off a cliff potentially. And so my concern with a budget that is this far out of balance with things that could be delayed or deferred until we're on a sustainable track is just given the uncertainty of when you can raise those revenues and when they actually hit your bank account. You don't want to run out of money.
Yeah, maybe Sharif, the way to frame it is, I know you guys are scrambling to get the data together and all that, is to say that in your presentation, what is our goal? ask the town council, what should be our target for when we do the September revision? Or make a recommendation. Maybe we recommend a balanced budget, or maybe we recommend we reduce the reserves, from 60% down to 25 temporarily, right? But I would put that, you got to introduce that mindset, because to your point, Bill, the history of the town is there's always extra money. And right now we have to pretend like we're running out of money, because we might run out of money and we don't have time to create new revenues.
And that's where I'm getting at. And that's, I agree with you that this is our coming to Jesus moment.
Yeah.
This is our moment to say, we probably have 18 months.
Yeah, it's
After in our-
not, in
in
the
our-
presentation though, there's no come to Jesus.
Yeah.
All right, I just would say you gotta make it grittier, and I would support you.
Let me just add one thing to the pile on that George mentioned that I think is worth repeating. And that is, I think it's going to be a long haul to get the town to approve any sort of tax increase. And the only way I think you might even be successful there is if we've shown that we've made the hard cuts. And then maybe there's a chance. And then hopefully we don't need to. But I think it seems to me anyway, from conversations, that maybe some people expect that a parcel tax is doable or is achievable. I'm not so sure. And I think the expectation should be that that will not be successful. How do we get there without that?
George, maybe a good time to take public comment, just in case.
Yeah.
Or see if Finance Committee has any more questions. or
Yeah,
comments and take a
that's the
pause.
first point. Anybody else here on the panel?
I'd like to just comment on this. The 1.9 million surprised me because it was substantially more than the increase from the sheriff's office. And I think after reading all of your presentation, that has a lot to do with ARPA funds that are no longer available. So that was like $1 million spent over 2 years, I think. And so even if we take out the sheriff's department the increase that they have, and it's less this year than with you've already negotiated a reduction for this year and next year. That we need to show the council, and we need to show residents that there are going to be less services provided by your government in the future. There's no getting around it other than an increase in taxes. So Steve, if you're right about people not wanting to pay more taxes, then they're going to have to accept less services. And it struck me, in preparing for the discussion that the committee is working on in terms of alternate ways of balancing the budget in the future, which is both more revenue as well as perhaps some cuts. I listened to council meeting, I think it was in Los Altos Hills, and they're going through the same problem. And one of the people said, well, why didn't we cut out this $1 million improvement to their town hall or something last year? And I'm thinking we shouldn't be in that position. We should cut it out now. That's my point when I said that we've used up over half of our runway here in this coming budget. There's not room. Other people have said the same thing by how many months we have until this all gets done. We need to start cutting back some services. And I think residents will then see that there's a purpose. We're cutting it back because we don't have the funds. So I wouldn't, I don't have a problem with it not being in balance 1 year or 2 years. But I think we need to lower the amount that we're spending in this first year. I think it would be wrong for the council to agree to take that large a deficit this year. And I would even be willing to have a resolution from the finance committee suggesting that they not accept the $1.9 million reduction or deficit this year.
other comments from the panel? Okay, we can shift to people in the room. Don't see any. We'll have David Cardinal lead us off. David.
Great. Thanks, George. Especially thanks for persevering in whoever's MiFi it is. That's brilliant because otherwise this would be a kind of a train wreck. It is hard to tell who's speaking, so I apologize if I don't name speakers. First of all, there was a bit of a heated back and forth on the budget access, and I have some comments on both sides of that. First of all, the Friday original version was missing a lot of links and data, which was kind of in keeping with, which is fine. And in the weekend it came in, and now I'm quite impressed by what's there. But to whoever made the comment, it's pretty hard to find. So I have to look in my bookmarks for like OpenGov to find the link that I had, once upon a time for it. So I think the simple answer, I mean, if the data is there, it's more like, let's get the link out. I also noticed you can't dive into the data unless you are an employee or somebody in OpenGov. If that's deliberate, that's fine. If we're supposed to be able to get into more detail, I couldn't figure that out. So that was my only point on that. So I found the data that was there once I got to it incredibly informative. And then on Ken's point, I do think, I don't necessarily agree with his personal opinion on what to cut, but at some point we have to tell people. I mean, the problem is not that the sheriff raised our rates. The problem is it costs a lot to do policing in this area for a variety of reasons. And if we want that much policing, it is going to cost us a lot of money that we don't currently have or don't think we have. And I think the town residents, I don't know, it's kind of insane. Like, oh, we want all this stuff, but we live in multi-million-dollar houses, but nobody wants to pay another few $100s a month or a year. So I do think an educational thing that you want to live in a first-class community. We're incredibly small scale. So maybe we can annex Ladera and Webb Ranch and Los Trancos Woods, which would be great. But short of that, it's a boutique town. And if we want boutique services, anything we can do to communicate to the residents that we're the richest town on the planet, bar Atherton. And if we want the services that go with that, we kind of have to get our act together. So thanks. I think it's been a really helpful meeting, and I look forward to the one tomorrow. Thanks.
Thank you, Dave. Greg, I believe, is next.
Yeah, hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Well, it's Greg Franklin. Very good meeting so far. I've found it very constructive and helpful. I just want to make a couple of comments on the forecasting problem, George, and I raised this issue at the work study meeting on April the 27th. When Sharif put his pie chart up with the projections, which I believe came out from the approved budget from last July, we had property tax revenues of 3.7, right? And that's still in his pie chart that he presented in his state of the town. And the reality is, if Paula correct, she's forecasting 2.9. So part of our problem is we came into this year, or we found ourselves this year, with an $800,000 hole 9 months year to date. If Paula Cones is correct, she may or may not be. I don't think we know that yet, but her forecasting has $2.9 million of property tax revenue, and our town council approved a budget assuming property revenues of 3.8. So there's, you have an 800,000, almost $1 million hole to start with. The second thing I think that we haven't addressed yet, and you guys need to help me a little bit with this, is when you get your property tax bill, there's a flyer in there with a pie chart that describes, and it's entitled, "Where do your taxes go?" And there's a category there called cities, and it's 15%. And what the note says, cities receive 15% and provide fire, police, and other community services. So that is the norm in San Mateo County. Well, if Paula Cone is right, we're receiving $2.9 million, which we also understand to be 4%, right? So if my math's correct, Portola Valley residents are contributing almost $100 million to San Mateo County budget. And we're receiving, of those property tax revenues, we're receiving $2.9 million back, right? And the sheriff, which is actually a part of the same body of government that's receiving this almost $100 million, is increasing charges for our police services so that we're paying $2 million, right? So we're getting in property tax from the county, if Paul is correct, 2.9 million. We're paying 2 million or almost 2 million. According to Sharif, we're getting a $450,000 discount. So our bill would really be closer to 2.3 million. It just seems to me a little bit out of whack. We're contributing almost $100 million. We're getting back 2.9, and the other pocket in the same organization is collecting 2 million. So I understand completely that wealthier communities should be contributing to the greater good in the county. But the question I think we should ask ourselves is this a fair allocation of property tax towards Portola Valley? And that's a question that the town council should mull over with resident input and have a consultation with the county board of supervisors. Does that all make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense. I think we've long felt that we pay a lot of tax to the county, we get some back, and then we have to pay more back to the county. So we don't get much revenue. I don't know exactly what we do about it. Let's see, Karen Vatra, I think you're next.
Hi, I have been wondering about the sheriff's substation. Yeah, they currently hang out in that maintenance area, but is it a possibility, instead of building that out at relatively expensive cost, is to using somewhere in the town center? I mean, we have a lot of rooms that aren't really that heavily used, and it might be cheaper to say, take the Buckeye room and let that be the sheriff's station for a while. I mean, just throwing that out there as an idea. Thank you.
Thank you. Good idea. Let's see, Rita. Hello, Rita.
Hi there. Thank you. I'm in the car, so I was just trying to unmute. And so we've had years of non-submitted year-end finances and yearly audits. And so, you know, we do have a serious trust issue. And the way the video is going, the Zoom is going, we can't tell who's speaking. So if you could please just say your name before you speak, that would be really helpful, because people have made some incredible comments, and I'd love to send you a thank you note. You know, information for finances in Portola Valley has always been lacking. You go to open.gov and you can't find the background information. And when we would ask in the previous finance meetings, we were always told, oh, that number, oh, we'll get it, we'll fix it in 2 weeks. And we would never get the reality of what those numbers are. So, you know, please understand, Sharif, that there's lots of frustration, and for the new finance manager, there's lots of frustration in our town on what is real, and not being able to get this information is just not new. And it's unfortunate that once again, we're here trying to present a budget that has all these promises in it, and it just puts us more in the hole. And the town council just approved an increase of fees for the residents. But here we are trying to fix things ahead by, you know, putting pressure on the residents, and increase of fees, talks of parcel tax and increase of taxes. And the last two items I just mentioned of the parcel tax and the increase of taxes would then be rushed in a special election and paid for by these same residents that are already being pressured. And not all people in our lovely town, because of different reasons, pay parcel tax. So it would then go to a lot of other people. And so I say, let's work with a budget work with a budget of things that we can already pay. I think in one of the previous meetings, there was somebody in town that said, hey, I got a cottage on my property. The sheriff's department can use that. There are all these things that are being said during oral statements and whatnot, and we don't hear them again, and it's the residents trying to help. And we don't hear them again. But what we do hear is, oh, they need a place. We've got one sheriff person in our town. They don't need 1 whatever million dollars worth of space when we don't have other things that are being cut, and the residents are even being charged for a picnic table at the Little People's Park. And so let's balance this out. Let's look at it realistic, and let's look out for the residents, because our town is a mecca for other people from other cities. Let's look out for the residents and stop let's overcharging the residents for past deeds that aren't cleaned up. Thank you.
Thanks, Rita. And the one point I would add to that is I did run just a back of the envelope. If one were to defer the sheriff substation and had a $1.3 million deficit, not 1.9, that doubles our quote runway from 26 months to 51 months, which more time is good when you're trying to figure out structural things. So I just throw that in because it occurred to me. If we can go to someone on the phone with the number ending 3056.
It's Dana. A lot of good comments. This is a good meeting. Thank you. I would like to say that it's unprecedented in my 30 years in town government that we have had an assistant town manager. I mean, that happened in the last 2 weeks of Jeremy being here, and I don't think we need an assistant town manager. So I think that would help. I think the sheriff absolutely should be in town hall. You walk into town hall now and it's empty. So I'm sure that there's a desk and a chair where they could work, and we need to remove that. And I also want to agree that I would never support a tax. So, not until we start to get fixed. I mean, the place is a mess. So, when I see this town start to turn around, I might think about it, but no tax. Thank you.
Thank you for the comment. Let's see, Dale Fow.
Yes, thank you, George. I'm also very supportive of the comments from other committee members saying, let's work on a balanced budget first. Let's whack out the sheriff's thing, but there's lots of other things that can be done in a budget to make this very close to a balanced budget. Present that to council. If council wants to add things in, and then to essentially tell them, okay, you go find the money. Because even though your little back of the envelope calculation, George, is important, I don't think realistically you can get a ballot measure on for an increased tax until a year from November. And then it's another year after that before it would probably kick in. And I also agree with Dana's comments that this town is in such a fiscal mess right now. It's like a poster child for fiscal mismanagement that I'm not willing to support any kind of increase until I see a really strong effort to get things back on track. But thanks very much for this committee for making some hard questions, hard decisions.
Thank you, Dale. Betsy, you have your hand up.
I forgot that I could unmute. Thank you, committee. I really want to say that I'm relieved to hear you all asking the hard questions. It's reassuring and refreshing to do so. And conversely, for some period of time now, I have been not at all reassured to hear reassuring remarks coming from the town at a time when I see reasons for concern. I hope that we can have this meeting posted to YouTube, preferably tonight, first thing tomorrow morning, so that council members who are not in attendance can avail themselves of this tremendously useful conversation. Again, I think it is all to the better, the transparency and the I think, refreshing new direction that I'm hearing today. Thirdly, Sharif mentioned this afternoon, he mentioned the reorganization and that there might be some additional new titles and changes of department. Regarding that, I'd like to request that the manager, Sharif, that you would post the job descriptions that go with the job titles, because I found myself as a committee chair frequently sending emails to multiple people because it's not clear who's assigned the task that I need done. And so I don't know where the buck stops, and it's going to waste your time to be a party to every single email. So I'd rather take the guesswork out of that. Lastly, at a long ago meeting, probably back in 2021, I began asking, and so did others, if we couldn't possibly account for the amount of monies that we have spent on the housing element RENA 6, which I'm grateful to be hearing the conversation today about reducing our consultant costs. We've got viable committees that can do some of this work and save us a lot of money. The question is how much money we have invested thus far, and I can think of multiple reasons why knowing that number annually and across the years would help us. It would help you make your case, I think, to the town when it comes time to raise taxes, as well as perhaps there will be some point in time where the state will take interest in how many of us are at the brink. Thank you for listening to my comments. Thank you for having this conversation. Good job, everybody.
Thank you, Betsy. Anyone else online want to put their hand up? Oh, Craig Taylor has his hand up in the room. Councilmember Taylor.
Thank you. So Craig Taylor, Town Council. I will speak for myself, but I think I'm speaking for the council as well. One of the things that we really value in the town are meetings like this and the recommendations that come out of a meeting like this. So if there's any chance between now and, granted it's tomorrow night, that you guys can come to some conclusions and make some recommendations. I read everything I get up to 5 o'clock at night. So, you know, the real power in this town is the committees. You know, and the council relies on the committees to vet this stuff. You know, otherwise it gets to us, and, you know, if we don't have the conversation, it's really hard for us to do our job. So I really appreciate what you guys are doing here. And I would second, Sharif, if we can get this posted, this meeting, the video, as good or bad as it is, sort of ASAP, I'd appreciate that as well. Anyway, thank you guys for your good work.
Thank you. More comments here from the dais before we move to the audit progress?
I do want to make a comment because we asked some hard questions, but I know Sharif and Tony and his whole staff worked their tails off to get all the data together. So thank you. And obviously, Sharif, you made it clear you've got a commitment to get it to us earlier. But as far as all the details, there's a lot more details here than there probably has been in the past. So I just want to make certain that did not get lost. We've all, I know from one-on-one conversations, everybody's been pouring through it and it helped us prepare. It was just kind of a crunch, right? We all spent a lot of time on this. So thank you for that. And I know you're working on timing, but I wanted to make it clear.
Thank you. And Tony and I and Cindy and Corey also wanted to go one step further, and we're actually looking into having a guest login. We can give you a guest login for OpenGov. And as you're at home, at your leisure, dig into the system. It's a public system. There's, you know, you can see what the assumptions are, what's in there and what's not, but basically see the system, look at it and know what's in there. And then also in the future, obviously, OpenGov sold towns on the platform of being OpenGov, open government. And so the whole point of OpenGov was to have this amazing platform where you can log in as a resident, drill down. It used to literally have a little drill that you could check and see, and that hasn't come to fruition. But that's the ultimate goal, is for a resident to be at home, log into OpenGov and have open system where you can look at the different funds, look at the different pieces, look at the expenses to a certain extent moving forward. So that's the ultimate goal moving forward. But also the fact of having a preliminary budget versus a final is to give Finance Committee more time to dive into the system and take a look at it.
Great. Thank you. And Ken?
So I'll just follow up on what Craig was saying. Is there some interest on the part of this committee to make a recommendation that the council reduce the deficit from $1.9 million so that we have more runway?
I would be happy to do that. I don't know what everyone else thinks of.
I'd support it.
That's Michelle, yeah. I would agree with that.
Yeah, this is Chris Rittler. I really support that we make a strong recommendation that the town council look at how to get to a significantly reduced deficit. And if we can put our heads together and maybe make a recommendation with a smaller subset, whatever it takes.
Well, just based on the conversation, one item that I heard strongly was deferring commitment to build a sheriff's substation at $600,000.
Yeah, I guess this is Chris Rittler again. I think that's an easy target.
Yeah.
I think there's more work that's needed,
Mhm.
right? And so maybe the other way to go after is kind of like what Bill was saying, right? Is put constraints on what you can spend.
Mhm.
And then come up with the answer to that, rather than us cherry picking the biggest, fattest item on the list. Right?
Sure.
And say, hey, we can't go below 40% or something like that, right? Then give a target.
But my
as a
understanding is that the council has to provisionally approve something preliminary now because the fiscal year is starting, right? Subject to review in September. So what do we recommend for them tomorrow, which obviously staff has worked very hard on the budget they already have?
Well, I mean, the other version of that would be to freeze all incremental spending until the September revision comes out. And no capital improvement projects get done, right? Like, just don't do the incremental until we have a September revision. You know, I would freeze additional hiring. I would freeze new consultants. So you don't add to your spending
Mhm.
when you're running a deficit, when you know you're running a budget.
Would some of that rehiring though, would that constrain your ability to streamline and cut spending or lock in old spending or how?
There needs to be more, detail to that. I certainly agree with the notion of doing that. However, there needs to be more analysis behind that of what would go per se. This town doesn't have the stomach for any of this. And so that part of that has to have that discussion. We saw what it was like to have 12 staff here. We saw what it was like to have 15 staff. And we saw what it was like when the doors were closed, when the phones weren't answered, and the town did not tolerate that for 3 hours. And so we really need to have that hard discussion tomorrow, basically saying, here's what you're not going to get. And make no mistake, this is my 21st budget. This is not my first rodeo. I know what I'm doing by putting in a $600,000 CIP piece. It's to have that discussion, because otherwise it won't rise to that level. And so this is exactly the conversation I think we need to have tomorrow. The issue is, like you're saying, George, is what do we do July 1st? And so there needs to be more discussion. So there's a preliminary budget, there's a final budget in September. What's that stopgap for those next 3 months? I'm certainly committed to not hiring the Assistant Director of Planning and Building, because that has not come to fruition. We only have one or two other vacancies that we can potentially put a hold on. But there's other pieces that, to say that we can't have consultants, it wouldn't work for the town of Portola Valley, because there are many projects like for your house that a consultant works on. So we can't just say no consultants. We'd have to either pick a number or put some parameter to it as far as.
Yeah, and I'm
we go
mindful of
there?
the fact that some of the value added so far has been the Christian company consultants that helped uncover our problems. And Rita, I forget the last name, the tax expert, who provided expert consulting on the revenue side. So we understand that better. So we can't just say no to all consultants, but some sort of recommendation that we defer any decisions to increase spending or do capital improvements.
What would help me is if Finance Committee was to say, we recommend that in the September revision, you balance your budget, or that you, instead of the 1.9 million, to cut it in half. Let's have an exercise to see what $800,000 would come up with.
Okay.
Let's have an exercise to see what $400,000 in reduction may be, some sort of piece. So then I can come back in September and say, if you want me to, and I'm using me as town manager, if you want me to balance your budget to the tune of $1 million, here's what's not going to happen. Then council can say, yes, we agree with that, or no, that's absolutely essential. We need to move forward on this or that piece, right? And so,
Yeah, I think that's very, very helpful because I just ran the calculus on simply eliminating the shiny big object, which is 600,000 this year. But cutting in half, I mean, what would people recommend as an alternative
I don't know,
recommendation?
Bill, you've done the most math that I've seen so far in regards to the reserve. So, you know, I kind of like that thinking, like that, hey, we have this 60%. We were at 62 as you calculated. And I think you were saying we get down to like 20-something%.
Yeah, so the interesting thing about this, the reserve requirement, 60% or policy, not requirement, it's policy at council, 60% of your anticipated adopted 12-month budget expenditure. So if this was going to be adopted as it is with no additional changes, you didn't add anything, you didn't update revenue projections, nothing was cut out. Tony and I were nodding that the number would be something over 60%. So the question for us is, historically, we measure it once a year, correct, Cindy? We go in fact, I think the policy says once a year, and we always do it in June based on the coming year. My recommendation to go along with everything else is we do it every quarter. And what we do is we take the actual cash we have in the bank and the investment, all the accounts on that, on September 30th or in time for this September update. And then we have to do an annualized projection. So we got 9 months of the budget for the rest of that year. You can come up with something you would want to assume for the June to September period of the next year. Maybe you take whatever it was this year and you put 3 or 5% on top or something. And we do a series over the next coming year, we do 4 measurements of that funding number. That will, first of all, it gives us some time to, drill down and see where we cut or enhance revenue. Secondly, it makes clear to ourselves as well as to the public, we're keeping an eye on the ball about what is, fiscal management to maintain a margin of safety. We know where we are. We're updating it not once a year, but continuously, and we continue to do it continuously, or at least every quarter, while we are doing deficit spending or while we're cutting into that reserve. And then we've got, I think, a powerful story, whatever we come up with in terms of cuts or changes for the budget, to say, we're taking all the measurements, we're monitoring it continuously. On the short term, we're going to accept some reduction in the reserve. It doesn't put in any critical position. Here are the things on the table. We're going to get figured out in the next 3 months. And I think we buy some time and credibility with all parties that the fiscal house isn't in order yet, but the measurement of where we are is believable. And we get the audits. We do our normal thing, we review the audits, we get those signed off. That's very important for people to feel comfortable with the numbers, and, maybe it'll change things a little bit. And I think that's a recommendation to the council on how we ought to move forward from here. And then we kind of leave it with them when it comes down to some of the hard decisions about it. We'll make some recommendations presumably about tax adjustments or whatever. They have to make the hard decisions about revenues or expenses. If they want a recommendation from us on a particular thing, we can come back with it. But I think we've set up the dashboard for them to continue driving for the next 3 months and then 6 months. I would think it'd make it a lot easier for you if you felt you weren't under the gun right up front for the whole year, that you keep getting a 3-month period and adjustment and update to say, we're still okay, we're getting closer, et cetera. So maybe that's the way forward.
Bill, quick question, pro forma for the current budget, 24-25. What do we think the reserves is as a percentage of the budget?
So if I read the way we do the measurement or have done the measurement, we take the general fund unrestricted balance. Now, this is something that can get confusing. We have restricted funds. There's a bunch of those. Those funds are not part of the general fund.
Right.
We can't take any of those monies. Then there's a general fund that has some things called assignments in it. These are things the council has said, maybe in the future, we're going to want to spend 1.4 million for capital. It's not committed. It's not in the lockbox somewhere. They can change it tomorrow. That is, that's part of the general fund balance. That's available to us. That's counted as part of available reserves under current policy. And so using that number and using what Tony and I were nodding about the general funds, expected expenditures, again, it's supposed to be the adopted budget, it hasn't been adopted, but it was 8.68. The general fund unrestricted money, you're projecting, I mean, it's only a couple weeks away, so I assume you know what it pretty much is going to be. It's about 5.44. We're at 62.7%. We're above 60%.
That's pro forma for next year's budget.
That's pro forma under current plans.
Okay.
That would get us through for the next year, because historically, we've only measured it once a year. But, George and I were doing
I know, I got
calculations.
it.
We're going to be well under, if you did a midpoint, and did projections to roll forward the current budget, you're going to drop below 60, probably by,
And I would make the
September.
argument we're already below 60.
yeah,
Because we have 21, 22 and 22, 23 audits. And because we broke even, for lack of a better word, in 2021, and we're at 900,000 3 years later, if you just wanted to split it and say it was minus 300 the first year, minus 600, now we're at minus 900. So that's 900,000 that we're not counting. It's not going to be zero.
Yeah, so the
So-
point is we have more cash than the cash we don't have as much unrestricted cash as we.
Correct.
But in any event, I'm just using, we have to use the same set of numbers to start from a
I-
place of.
And I mean, this is a caveat. That number is an estimate. Because we do not have completed audits for the last 3 fiscal years.
Yeah, I'm sorry, you
well
keep
aware.
saying it's an estimate, but you can go into an account balance and look at
But
it.
not every transaction has been posted for the last 3 fiscal years, so I do not have complete numbers.
But then that says we're past due on bills.
No, we've paid them, they just haven't been posted in the system.
So the cash, we know where our cash is.
We know the cash, but it's, not all the expenses have been posted, not all the revenue has been posted, not all the changes and transfers back from other funds have been posted, so we
But
don't have, I don't have.
Well, here-
Would there be adjustments to cash based on any of what you just said?
If I can help explain things, I think this may help you. In municipal accounting, what makes this much more complicated than in my universe of the business world is there are all kinds of funds where allocations are made, all these different funds that we see for Measure W and Measure A and Measure this and that. and the other thing.
Separate buckets.
And they all roll into one bank account. So you see a certain amount of cash, but then they all have to be assigned to all these various funds, and that hasn't all been audited. Is that correct?
So, but then what that says, Steve, to your question is through the audit, there would be adjustments to cash because there would be expenses that were improperly assigned to different funds. And then you'd have to move the cash around.
I don't think you move the cash.
Within the funds, but the cash is in the bank.
The
Yeah, I
cash-
understand.
The cash just sits
So
there. You
you
just
know
allocate.
total cash, but you don't know cash precisely for each fund.
Tell you for right now, the general fund balance.
But
because I
you
have
can tell the,
Big counting for the last 3 fiscal years.
So the 5.455,
Is just an estimate for now.
and it could be
It could
plus or
change.
minus, it could be off by how much? 500,000?
That's what I'm saying. I think it's probably 500,000. Because if we're negative 900,000 for last fiscal year, it had to start somewhere.
So
If 2 years prior to that, you broke even at zero, then it's going to be at least $500,000, $600,000, $700,000.
So the way you generally deal with uncertainty in a case, you give a best estimate or a central value or something for planning purposes, and then you do what if planning based on, it's 5% lower, it's 10% lower, and then there's contingencies about what happens if the audit comes in and, 500,000 is disappeared, and instead of being at 62.7%, we're at 58%. Well, then people like me probably come forward. That's why we've had this damn cash sitting there, basically doing nothing for 20 years to absorb situations just like this. The purpose of running a town is not to have zero problems, is to plan around the problems and have something else can offset it temporarily so you can buy time to reduce expenses or find some new tax thing. So I'm less worried about the fact that there's uncertainty in the numbers and trying to get us focused on the fact that we're on some kind of glide path and and it ends up, we're out of money. And we're not sure if, the lights are red and white below, or are they all red, too low, whatever. And that's going to change a little bit, but we are on a glide path. We're not crashing. And we've still got time to, add power or dump fuel or the analogy goes only so far, but it's only really about, there's a certain set of things we have to measure at a certain points in time, and we have to be very deliberate about doing them and very clear about what they mean as we're trying to be here, and then document them very crisply, both for the council, for ourselves, and for, most importantly, for the citizens. Because there's one thing I got, there's a lot of distrust, a lot of impatience.
Right.
Translate into, I don't want to pay more for anything because I don't believe the numbers, and we've got to get rid of that. I mean, we can't, we got the resources.
And I wholeheartedly believe that if you're gonna do any type of revenue measure, you have to have the data, and it has to be
Yeah.
complete.
Yeah.
And it has to be fully audited, and here's the story.
That's right.
Now, this is my 16th year of doing budget. Every city I've been in before, we have a chart that start off everything that would have 10 years of fiscal history. And then you have your estimate for the current year, you have your proposed budget for the next current year, and then you would have a 5-year projection. And it's called, it's financial planning, and it's a fiscal forecast. We had it at Scotts Valley, Saratoga, Pacific Grove. In fact, Pacific Grove, a very similar situation that I find myself here, where we had to have consultants come in and develop a fiscal sustainability plan for us. And these are the charts that we started with. I can't go back 10 years because I've got 3 years of missing information. In fact, I just posted journal entries yesterday for 2021. And the Chris report cannot spell it out any clearer. So I can't say with absolute certainty or even reasonable certainty that that is the number that we're going to have going into 24, 25. It may be better, it could be worse, but I don't want to be in a position where if it comes in worse, that no one on the finance committee or no one on the city council can say you weren't told. And I'm here to tell you right now, I don't know that number.
Okay.
But Tony, and I appreciate that. However, we do know the total cash balance. And we could.
Yes, we have the
could
bank
shape our-
statements to show what our cash balances are. Right.
So we
Are they
could,
reconciled back to our statements, our financial statements? No, they're not.
I understand, but we could shape our spending to go to whatever the correct fund is rather than,
Right, but the concern is the general fund.
yes.
The cat,
Understood.
most of the cash in our bank is open
So when
space.
do you believe we will have the
I will have a better
federal
understanding.
fund,
I will have a better understanding with the completion of the 22-23 audit.
and when's that?
That's
Couple months away,
Couple months ago. So
Well-
we're in June. so
Yeah.
August.
by September, maybe.
And
October.
that would be, I think, a good recommendation for us is that the town council consider adopting a budget or considering a budget with a much lower deficit projection until we know what our
Well,
status is.
And it might just be very unpopular,
Yeah.
but why not say no deficit spending until we know this number? Just to be safe,
Well, I would imagine that would require layoffs and all sorts of other things.
right? Well, then no incremental spending above
Yeah.
today,
Mhm.
right? You know what you're spending today, no incremental spending above today until you know this number. I'm just saying, if we have uncertainty, got to get to certainty, right?
And incremental spending would take into account run rate. So obviously for the new hires, but anything beyond that is
Right.
flatline.
Right, you know, you know what you're spending today, you're gonna keep paying the people you have, but until you have this number, why start a CIP? Why hire a new person? Why, I mean, honestly, in private enterprise, you would cut all your consultants today. based on the situation we're in, you would cut all consultants today and figure out how to get out of the mess before you start rolling consultants back in. That's why I have consultants on payroll instead of full-time.
The town of Portola Valley is built a little differently in that the work that's done, the services that are done have consultants built into it. And so you're not able to do that to that degree. You can cut down on building and planning department. We have 2 people in building and planning,
But our
2
building and
employees.
planning department has,
So your
has full-time
your
headcount.
inspector, your building inspector, your code enforcement, your plan inspectors, when you have a project that goes through the town, it's not staff that reviews and approves that, it's a consultant. That's the way it's built. And that's where I'm mentioning that model is wrong
Yeah.
and we need to fix it. And so in the past, we actually had 6 full-time staff and 6 or 7 consultants. We drove a truck through it because of the housing element, because of things that were going and these pieces. And through attrition, we brought that all the way down to 2. And so now we need to figure out what's that happy medium. I feel the happy medium is probably going to be 3 staff and some consulting because we're not going to pay for
Yeah,
a
so I'm
full-time
not-
inspector.
So maybe Sharif, you can govern my enthusiasm to curb spending. But how do we come up with a recommendation? Because the recommendation is clear. Until we know the balance of the general fund, we have great risk. So we need to take action to curb spending now. Right? So.
Correct, yeah, absolutely.
So, but there, and you've already proposed some actions, but I hear you saying. we know we need
Not
even
enough,
more.
basically, yeah. not
Right,
enough.
so what do? We could come up with a target and say, don't go below 40%, right? I'm throwing a random one out, but.
Yeah, we could come up with something like that in 3 months. And we'd probably first thing we probably do is say, where did the 60% come from? Data or assumptions of that base, right? And we might come up with our own assumptions. Whether it ought to be based
Right now, it's a policy.
and it's much higher than most towns are anyway. I'm not saying we like, go to a much lower number just because it means we don't have to make hard decisions. But we are not violating, we're not going to violate for some number of months unless, you tell me you get $2 million wrong. Hey, we're not going to violate within the outside, or you're not going to violate government, also people in town in the next 3 to 6 months, when by then, we have it audited, we be able to validate some of the numbers, we reduce the margin of error. And maybe we need to set and say, we're running a tighter ship now, so maybe we don't need them. Maybe we're about 40 or 50 because it's numbers.
Bill, your microphone is not on, I don't believe.
I'm done.
Yeah, so, but going back to the point, maybe it's just taking a step back. The September revision is 90 days away. It's 3 months. Nothing is going to drop off a cliff in 3 months. I'm not going to spend as your town manager anything that's egregious or not in the budget already. Take the $600,000, that wouldn't happen anyways, but take the $600,000 sheriff station, take some of these bigger projects out. You have 90 days. I think we might even be overcomplicating it. What if the finance committee's recommendation is you need to come back at the September revision to tell the council and the town, what would it take to have a balanced budget? In order to have a balanced budget, you would need to lay off this many staff, not have this many consultants. Your building project that takes 60 days would now take 120 days. The phone will be answered in 3 business days versus 1 business day. That's what I'm typically used to, right? What's that impact? As opposed to just arbitrary number, then council can dial back and say, no, wait a second. That's not okay for us. We need to have someone at the front desk. We need to have someone answer the phone. You need to have, because there's not much to it at the end of the day. Because we're 18 staff, it's foreign finance. Do you need foreign finance? We established that already through Krish and through proper controls that you need foreign finance. We only have 2 in building and planning. Do we need 2? There's 3 in public works, right? You can very quickly come up to well, we have a town engineer or public works director and you have 2 staff. Well, what about if we don't mow the lawns? What does that mean? That means you might not need a staff member. So those certain exercises we can certainly do without, I think, overcomplicating or getting to, you know what I'm saying? Because the September revision's right here. We're not going to be.
I would
Talking it
vote,
through.
I would vote for the recommendation being come back in September with what it would take to get to a balanced budget. And then you have the list. And then we have that, plus we have a better view into what's in the reserve for the general fund. And then we can start to play the 60%, 40%, or 26% or whatever it is game. But by listing the actions for a balanced budget, then we can start to prioritize and play the trade-offs. That'd be my proposed recommendation.
I like that. And of course, that implies that we wouldn't be committing to the sheriff's substation between now and then, as you just said.
Correct. Yeah.
So
Yeah,
does that make
probably
sense?
The only major change, you would know if VLF's in, but
And,
because that's going to pass June. The budget's supposed to pass June 15th.
and we'd have to make a recommendation of this, what would happen. We're not saying on September 30th, this is what we recommend, right? Because there needs to be a dialogue and a discussion. So for sake of argument, you have, and this is Sharif, town manager, speaking, we have 20 staff. Okay, if we're going to let go of 5 people, we're not saying we're letting go of 5 people. What if you let go of 5 people? This is the,
This is scenario.
right?
planning.
Because remember, you have staff, these are their livelihoods,
and
this
this
is
is
our
the thing.
livelihood.
It-
We wanna
it's
frame the
exactly what
discussion.
George said, it's scenario planning.
Yeah.
Right? And then what we can do as the finance committee, because Bill and I signed up for this, is as we get better reserves numbers, we can go back and look at the 60% and, model out, well, is it 60? Should it be 40? What should it be? Right? So then we can backstop some of the work you're doing with some analysis on our side. And you could bring that together, and then the town council can have a meaningful conversation then.
So my feeling is that 60% is irrelevant. That's not our problem. Our
Right.
problem is that we have an unsustainable, as Sharif has already said, we have an unsustainable budget process here, or budget. We can't continue to lose $1.9 million every year. And in fact, if we do for this coming year, we'll be down to 20%.
Right.
Number.
If we do the math, the back of the napkin math, we're losing $200,000 a month.
Yeah.
At this rate.
And so to me, the recommendation to the council should be that we can't continue on an unsustainable basis. We need to, and the sooner we cut back, the easier it'll be to find a solution.
Yeah, I agree. I think the way to put that into something digestible is, as was just discussed, that we vote that we recommend to the town council that they request staff to work up a balanced budget and scenario plan, balanced budget scenario to consider at the September time period.
And that we immediately start measuring against the reserve policy on a quarterly basis using the best available estimated numbers based on whatever audits and, proper logging of
Yeah,
account balances.
once we're able, yeah.
Pardon? Yeah.
Once we're able. Can I have that in the form of a resolution from someone?
And scenario planning.
And the scenario.
Yeah. September. Yeah. And that we measure against reserves on a quarterly basis once. Okay. Thank you. Well, I think we understand the intent. We can get the wording right. Do I hear, okay, in favor? Aye. Opposed?
Aye.
Okay, guys, carry it. That's a recommendation. Okay, good. Anything more on this topic, or we can go to the, did you want to show the OpenGov stuff, or is that something we should defer now?
I think we can defer that, and we'll work on finding a way to get you access to the
Yeah,
system.
that's
So-
great. That's brilliant. Okay. That would help us. The more we can dig in on our own and not annoy you guys, the better. As we try to work through this and be a resource, not a drag on all of this. Okay, let's go to new business 5B, the update on the audit process. And we have a draft in hand. You heard some comments earlier. I'm just wondering if the best thing is it possible to schedule time with Mays and Company to have us review and ask questions and put this to bed? When would they be ready for that?
We can certainly bring them out to do that. I'm not sure if maybe we wait to get the 21, 22 as well. I think that would
Okay.
help,
We could do two at once.
2 at once.
Mhm.
And we can also ask them what the timeline is for the rest, right? Because we want to the goal is to get all 3 by the end of the year. We don't want to wait till the end of the year, but if we can get the next one.
Question,
done, I
does,
think it'd be
does the
helpful.
22 have to depend on finalizing the 21s?
No, it's basically a concurrent review of all 3 years, right? So they're looking at all of them all at the same time, but then releasing in order the financials, so.
I'm sorry, so when would the 22, 23 be done? You said September?
If I had to guess, probably September,
It makes more
because it's
sense.
summertime.
Personally, looking at 3-year-old numbers don't do a whole lot for me. I think it makes more sense to have the 3 years complete and then we just be out this year's fiscal year 24, right?
Yeah, and then we'd be current, correct?
So if we could schedule a meeting, well, it sounds like September is a big month for updates.
Yeah, and I don't think we'll
then,
have the 3rd year ready at the same
Right,
time.
no.
Yeah.
No, 22, 23. You're saying September,
Oh, I see.
September, or December?
September for 22, 23, the next one, right? We did 21, no,
But
I
not
misspoke.
but not-
21, 22 September, then 22, 23 is December. Then we'd basically be current except for this fiscal year that we're in right now.
So opinion of the committee members, is it better to look at the first 2 or to do all 3 at one big grand audit
I
catch-up session?
personally don't have a lot of relevance in 2-year-old data. So I would wait till at least.
I mean, we
December.
should have the drafts to look at as soon as they're available, as we already have.
You'll get the drafts as soon as they're released. I agree, Michelle, there's limited value in just looking at 2021 right now and inviting the auditor to come out and the release. I think you need to see the bigger picture. But as soon as we get as each report gets released, we'll release that to Finance
And
Committee.
September sounds like a big month anyway, and there's no point of piling on audits, 2-year-old audits.
George, I propose we, whenever the next finance committee meeting is, we can all independently review and then just have an agenda item where if we have any questions on the audit, we cover it there. And
Okay.
obviously getting all 3
Yeah, and we can
is
review.
the ultimate goal, but we don't want to slow them down. either.
No, so we can review the drafts.
Right.
And have that as an agenda item to ask questions of one another, because we're in public and the staff here. And then we'll plan on only pulling the auditors out here for the big
When we have
grand
all 3.
meeting to go through whatever issues there are when we have all
Yeah.
3 in sight.
Yeah,
Okay.
I like that.
All right, that works for me. Okay. I see a couple hands online and I just want to make certain we address those before we wrap up. Let's see, Betsy, you have your hand up.
Yeah, thank you so much. My question ties in with both the subjects. As I think I know a source of the trust issue has been the multiple years that the town has been budgeting in a black box without a good handle at all on our actuals. And how wonderful would it be to have year-over-year trend analysis? We've given it lip service. We've never been able to produce it in the in the 6 years I've been attending meetings now, I have not seen such. So the faster that we can get to that, the more reassuring it will be. And I do think this will have an immediate important impact on our interest in addressing the deficit and tax revenues to, if appropriate. So I'm getting to know the new members' voices. It might have been Mark that suggested no deficit spending until we know these numbers. I wondered whether it wouldn't be appropriate to make one caveat to that and to investigate, to have Sharif and Tony investigate expediting, whether it's Krish and company, or how do we expedite and get these audits complete so that we are working with real numbers in which you all have confidence and we're not having to talk out of our hat, so to speak. That would be very interesting to me. I think it would really level things. So thank you for considering it.
Thanks, Betsy. Yeah, I think everyone's moving as quick as they can. I'm sure we're all on the same page there, wanting accurate data. So Tony can do his job, Sharif can do his job even better. Dave Cardinal.
Oh, thanks. It's kind of a niggle, but it's really easy as somebody who spent 20 years as an executive in various size companies to when you're in another setting to say, well, in business or in private enterprise, we would do this or we would do that. And in my 20 years, there was no single answer to anything. We had turnarounds, we had rocket ship rides, we had bankruptcies. So I don't know. I think it'd be good to just chill and a little bit and say, public organizations are a bit different, and there's a lot of responses, and there's no one size fits all approach. Now, that said, I'm totally for great, let's go for a balanced budget or whatever. But if I was, I don't know, if I was Tony or Sharif or Cindy, it'd be like, well, thank you for sharing. I'm glad you had your experience, but we're running a town and that's a little different. So, and of course, they wouldn't say that. Maybe it doesn't bother them, but kind of bothers me. So there you go. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Anyone else online? Anyone else here on the dais? Okay, let's see, moving on, any other business?
Yeah, it's Michelle. I'd like to know from Sharif, how soon you'd want to start getting feedback from the working groups? I mean, should it all wait until after September? I mean, there's some urgency, obviously, but realistically, when does it make sense from your point of view?
I have the same question, Michelle. So I don't know the answer to that. I think as the information comes in, I'd like to get it. And so if there's some recommendation from Finance Committee along the way, I'd be certainly open to get that feedback so that we can start incorporating what that may look like in the September revision. For instance, if we all think it's clear that we're going to have a parcel tax, right or wrong, if we think that's necessary, then I think we should budget for it, talk about it, put it in the September revision. When it would happen, all those different pieces could be talked about later. If we feel we want to pursue being a charter town, as example, and we know that answer in August, I would love to get that feedback so then I can tell council, you know what, it seems like from like-minded folks, and we have a lot of educated folks here, that we want to pursue a charter town, or we pursue the charter town aspect and it's just not worth it. And I used the saying before that the juice doesn't seem to be worth the squeeze, because we did an analysis of how many houses would be sold, what the revenue would be, and so we're going to basically kill that. We're not going to bring that up anymore. So asked and answered kind of thing. So depending on the work group, I would love to get feedback sooner than later, but the intention is whatever I can put into the September revision, I would like to, especially on some of the bigger items. So that would mean that the Finance Committee would either need to meet beforehand or at least communicate with me some of their findings moving forward.
Well, in working with the charter city, you need elections to become a charter, and then you need an election to approve a transfer tax. So, I mean, it wouldn't impact, other than budgeting for the cost, it wouldn't impact this next fiscal year.
Right. It's just a matter of whether or not we want to move forward, right? It's the Finance Committee recommends moving forward on this measure or that measure, or, we looked at that, we're not going to bring it up again, right? We talked about annexing this piece of land, it's not worth it. We're not going to bring it up to council as an example. So what is it that that Finance Committee thinks should rise to the level of recommending to council? So if there's 6 or 7 measures that the Finance Committee is working on, maybe there's 3 that seem to be worth bringing back, for example.
Yeah, let's try to make progress over the next month in our respective working groups and see if we get somewhere, and whether we need to have a meeting or not. Versus communicating some of the findings to Sharif, given they're preliminary. As you point out, most of these, if not all of these actions, would require going to the voters, which takes a very long time. But understanding the thinking about, this kind of doesn't seem to be on the pathway, or this may be, we can do that offline.
Well, I guess it seems to me there's certain things like reserves and it sounds like you need to wait till you have better data, right? The reserve group,
No, I mean, some work we can do about
real numbers.
number. Velocity, where to pick that number, what that base.
I'm wondering if we should have a meeting before September. Sharif is nodding.
I
Yeah,
think it would make sense to have a meeting probably like mid-August as an example.
okay.
We're,
Go over the working group's initial findings. And like you say, then these 3 or 4 items.
to
reserve
pursue, move forward.
Further, okay.
Yeah.
So it's just a,
I think you definitely need to meet before September to be able to give recommendations.
Okay. We will try to do that and find a way to find everyone when
The difficult part is the
on
summer
vacation.
scheduling.
Yeah, that's the only
Or
problem.
maybe it's, the first week in September or something,
Yeah, yeah,
so that you give staff time to put it into the revision, if you will.
yeah, yeah. Okay. Great. We will work on that offline. Anything else? Right. Motion to adjourn?
Adjourn.
All right. We are adjourned at 6:21.